The jeweler set my late wife's ring under the magnifying glass, tilting it gently beneath the overhead light. Margaret had worn that ring for 39 years. Small diamonds around a single sapphire center. Nothing flashy, nothing expensive by today's standards. But she had loved it the way she loved everything quietly and completely. I was having it resized and cleaned so I could give it to my son at the family gathering the next evening. He had mentioned more than once that his wife admired it. I thought it would be a gesture of trust, of letting go, of saying that I understood his life had moved forward, even though mine had slowed down considerably since Margaret passed. My phone buzzed against the glass counter. I didn't recognize the number. No area code I knew. I almost ignored it. I get spam texts, the way most men my age get unsolicited mail, but something made me open it. Just a single line. No greeting. No name at the end. Don't sign anything at tomorrow's meeting. They're not who you think they are. Please. I stood there, under the humming lights of that jewelry shop in Nashville for a long moment, reading it twice, then a third time. The jeweler was saying something about rhodium plating. I couldn't hear him. My eyes stayed on those two sentences until the words stopped making visual sense and became just shapes. I thanked the jeweler, told him I'd pick up the ring in 2 days, and walked out to the parking lot. The afternoon was warm and gray, the kind of October sky that can't decide whether it wants to rain. I sat in my truck and looked at that number for a long time before I called it back. It rang 4 times. I was about to hang up when someone answered but didn't speak. I could hear breathing, then the sound of a door closing somewhere, like whoever it was had just stepped into a private space. "Who is this?" I said. Silence for another few seconds. Then, "Mr. Haynes, I wasn't sure you'd call back." I didn't recognize the voice right away. It had been 5 years, and people's voices change when they've had a hard stretch of years. But something in the cadence, something in the careful formality of Mr. Haynes, pulled at a thread in my memory. "Raymond?" I said. A breath. "Yes, sir." Raymond Cole had worked for me for 11 years, at Haynes Civil Engineering. He was one of the best project managers I had ever employed, detail-oriented and steady under pressure, the kind of man who caught errors before they became problems. I had let him go in the summer of 2019. The economy had turned, 2 contracts fell through in the same quarter, and I had to make cuts I didn't want to make. Raymond had not taken it well. He'd sent a letter afterward suggesting I could have found another way if I'd tried harder. I had never responded to that letter. It had sat in a drawer in my office until I sold the firm and cleaned everything out, and then I threw it away without rereading it. "How did you get this number?" I asked. "I still know people who worked for you," he said. "I'm sorry to contact you this way. I've been going back and forth for 2 days about whether to say anything at all." "What exactly are you saying?" Another pause. I could hear him choosing his words. 3 weeks ago, I started a new position with Whitmore Financial Group. It's a smaller firm. Estate planning mostly, some investment management. Last Tuesday, I was finishing up some filing in the conference room after everyone else had gone home. I didn't realize 2 people were still in the building. They were in the adjoining office, and the door between wasn't fully latched. He stopped. "Mr. Haynes, I don't know the right way to say this." "Then just say it plainly," I told him. "Your son was there with a man named Gary Moss. They were talking about you, about the house on Elm Ridge, the investment accounts, the pension from the sale of the firm. They were talking about getting you to sign a durable power of attorney document at a family dinner. Your son said you were, his words, sentimental enough right now that it would go smoothly. He said the anniversary of your wife's passing was coming up and you'd been emotional." Raymond's voice was careful, steady, the same voice he'd used when delivering project assessments. Gary Moss told him the document was drafted. He said once it was signed, the next step would be straightforward. He used the word conservatorship. I didn't say anything. "Mr. Haynes, I heard you," I said. "I know you fired me. I know I wasn't gracious about it at the time. And I understand if you don't believe me, or you think I have some reason to cause trouble. But I have 2 daughters. And I kept thinking if someone overheard something like this about me, I'd want them to say something. That's all this is." I thanked him. I told him I'd think about what he said. I drove home on autopilot, parked in the driveway, and sat in the truck another 10 minutes before I went inside. Gary Moss had been my personal attorney for 14 years. I had used him for the sale of the firm, for Margaret's estate, for updating my own will after she passed. He knew the full picture of my finances. He had sat at my kitchen table and accepted my hospitality more times than I could count. Last Christmas he had sent a card signed, with warmth and gratitude. I had kept it on the mantel until February, because Margaret had always kept Christmas cards out longer than the season demanded, and it made the house feel less quiet. I made myself a cup of coffee I didn't drink and sat at the kitchen table until after midnight. By the time I went to bed, I had already made several decisions. The next morning, I drove to the offices of Patricia Whitfield, an attorney I had met briefly at a Chamber of Commerce event 2 years prior. I had liked the way she spoke, precise, unhurried, unimpressed by complexity. I explained the situation. I did not mention Raymond by name. I simply told her that I had reason to believe someone with knowledge of my financial situation was advising a family member on how to obtain power of attorney over my affairs, and that I wanted to understand my options before attending a family meeting that evening. Patricia listened without interrupting. She asked 3 questions. Then she told me exactly what to do. Over the next several hours, I contacted my bank, my investment manager, and my accountant. Assets I had kept in straightforward accounts were restructured into a revocable living trust, something Patricia had walked me through in clear terms. I was still the trustee. I still controlled everything. But a power of attorney, even a legitimately signed one, would have had no effect on a properly structured trust. The accounts Gary would have been expecting no longer existed in the form he'd documented. Patricia also made a phone call to the Tennessee Board of Professional Responsibility on my behalf. She had enough specifics: Gary's name, the name of the financial firm where he'd met with my son, the nature of the document he'd prepared to open a preliminary inquiry. She told me I would need to follow up in writing. I told her I intended to. I drove home and changed my shirt. I put on the gray jacket Margaret had always said made me look like a college professor rather than an engineer. Then I drove to my son's house on the other side of Nashville. His home is a large craftsman-style house on a cul-de-sac, bought 3 years ago with a significant down payment I had contributed to without being asked. I had done it because it made me happy at the time. Margaret and I had always believed in helping while we were alive to see the benefit of it rather than leaving everything for after we were gone. I thought about that as I pulled into the driveway and saw the warm light in the front windows. My daughter-in-law opened the door. She was dressed nicely, hair done, and she greeted me the way she always did: a quick hug, a comment about how long the drive must have been, a question about whether I was hungry. The kitchen smelled like the rosemary chicken she knew I liked. My son came out of the study looking relaxed and put together. He was wearing the watch I'd given him for his 40th birthday. "Dad," he said, and clapped me on the shoulder. "Glad you made it." I told him it was good to be there. We ate at the dining room table, the 3 of us, with good food and easy enough conversation. My son asked about my neighbor's new fence project. My daughter-in-law described a renovation they were planning for the upstairs bathroom. It was all perfectly calibrated to feel like an ordinary family evening, and I sat through it with my coffee cup and my steady hands and said what was needed, watching. Gary Moss arrived at 7:30. He came in with the easy familiarity of a man who considered himself welcome, a bottle of wine under one arm, his briefcase in the other hand. He shook my hand with both of his and said I was looking well. I told him it was good to see him. We moved to the living room. My son sat on the couch beside his wife. Gary settled into the armchair across from me, opened his briefcase on the coffee table, and removed a folder. He talked for several minutes about estate planning. In general terms, the value of having updated documents, the peace of mind that came from clear structures, the wisdom of addressing these things while one was still in good health, rather than waiting for circumstances to force the decision. He was good at it. Measured, reasonable, the voice of professional concern. The document appeared about 12 minutes into his presentation. He slid it across the coffee table toward me, with a pen laid across the top. "This is just a durable power of attorney," he said. "Standard language. It gives Derek authority to manage financial matters if you're ever incapacitated. Something every man your age should have in place." I looked at the document. Then I looked at my son. He was watching me with an expression I recognized, the careful neutrality of a person trying very hard not to appear to want something. "Gary," I said. "Who prepared this?" "I did," he said. "On your behalf." "Whose behalf?" I asked. He adjusted slightly. "In your interest. As your attorney." "When did we discuss this?" A pause. Small, barely perceptible. But I had been an engineer for 35 years, and I had sat across from contractors and vendors and inspectors, and I knew the pause before a manufactured answer. "We've spoken about your estate several times over the years. This is the natural next step. I don't remember authorizing you to draft any document." The room had changed in temperature without anyone moving. My daughter-in-law had set down her wine glass. My son leaned forward slightly with his elbows on his knees. "Dad," my son said, "it's just paperwork. It protects you." "Does it?" I said. Not as a question. I reached into the inside pocket of my gray jacket and set Patricia Whitfield's business card on the coffee table next to Gary's folder. "I met with a new attorney this morning," I said. "Patricia Whitfield. Some of you may know the name." I looked at Gary when I said it. "I've had my accounts restructured into a living trust as of this afternoon. The accounts referenced in that document no longer exist in the form listed. Patricia has also initiated a professional conduct inquiry with the State Bar regarding an attorney who was retained by me personally while simultaneously advising a family member on obtaining control of my assets. I'm told that's a fairly clear conflict of interest." The silence in that living room was the loudest thing I had heard in a long time. Gary Moss picked up his folder and closed it. He started to say something. I saw his mouth open, but he stopped. Whatever calculation he was running, the answer came up empty. He put the folder in his briefcase, closed the latch, and stood up. "Walter," he began. "You should go," I told him. "Whatever you need to say to me, you can say it through Patricia." He left without the wine he'd brought. I heard the front door close, and then his car in the driveway, and then the street outside was quiet again. My son was looking at the floor. My daughter-in-law had her arms crossed and her eyes fixed somewhere on the wall above my head. I was not angry the way I had expected to be. Sometime in the long night before, the anger had moved through me and left something harder and quieter in its place. A kind of clear-eyed steadiness. Margaret had once told me that grief and betrayal have the same texture. They hollow you out and then wait to see what you put back in. I thought she had been right about most things. "I don't understand," my son said finally. His voice was thinner than usual. "I think you do," I said. He looked up at me and I could see him calculating whether to try to explain, to rephrase, to find some angle that made what had just been sitting on that coffee table into something other than what it was. I watched him search for it and not find it. "I've been thinking about your mother's ring," I said. "I was going to give it to you this weekend. I'd had it cleaned. I thought it was something that should pass to your family while I was still here to give it." I looked at the two of them. "I've changed my mind about that." My daughter-in-law's expression shifted. Something that was not quite remorse, not quite shame, but something adjacent to both. "I'm going to leave now," I said. "I'm not going to spend the night in anger, and I'm not going to turn this into something longer than it needs to be this evening. Gary will be dealing with his own consequences. The documents he filed on your behalf will be addressed through proper channels. If either of you wants to have an honest conversation with me, not through attorneys, not through paperwork, just two people sitting down, my door is open." I picked up my jacket from the arm of the chair and stood. "Dad," my son started. "I love you," I said. "That part hasn't changed. But I'm not confused about what happened here." I drove home in the dark with the radio off, down the long stretch of I-65 with the Nashville skyline shrinking behind me. The anger had gone, but the hurt was still present. Something like a low-grade ache in the chest, the kind of thing you breathe around rather than through. I thought about the drive home I used to make when Margaret was still alive, how I would see the kitchen light on from the end of the street, and something in me would release a tension I hadn't known I was carrying all day. That light had been off for 2 years now. I turned it on when I got home anyway. I sat at the kitchen table with a glass of water and my phone, and I did something I had been thinking about all afternoon. There is a veterans housing initiative based out of Franklin, Tennessee, run by a retired Army chaplain named James Holbrook, who I had met once through a mutual acquaintance. They restore and renovate transitional housing for veterans and their families. I had looked them up that morning after leaving Patricia's office, while I was waiting for my accountant to return a call. I found their donation page, and I made a contribution. A meaningful one. The kind of contribution that earns a phone call from the director the next morning, which is exactly what happened. I also sat down that evening and wrote the letter to the Bar Association that Patricia had outlined for me, formal, specific, factual, citing dates and the name of the financial firm and the language Raymond had overheard. I read it twice, changed 2 sentences, printed it, and left it on the counter to mail the next morning. Then I called Raymond Cole. He answered on the second ring. "I owe you an apology," I said, "and not just for what happened 5 years ago. I also owe you a thank you." He was quiet for a moment. "You don't have to. I'd like to finish," I said. "When I let you go in 2019, I told myself it was purely economic. And it was, in one sense. Well, but there were things I could have structured differently, and I chose not to. You weren't wrong about that in the letter you sent. I kept that letter a long time. I should have said something sooner." Raymond didn't say anything immediately. I heard a television in the background, children's voices, the sound of an ordinary evening in a house that still had people filling it up. "How did it go tonight?" he asked. "About the way you'd expect," I told him. "Some things ended. The right things, I think. I'm okay." "Good," he said. "I'm glad." We talked for about 20 minutes. I learned he had 2 daughters, 9 and 12, and a wife who taught middle school science in Murfreesboro. He had gone back for a project management certification after the layoff and found his way into financial operations, which was how he'd ended up at the firm where he'd overheard that conversation. He said nothing about whether he expected anything in return for what he'd done. He talked about it the way a man talks about something he'd simply had to do. Not heroic, not strategic, just unavoidable given who he was. Before we hung up, I told him I was restructuring some charitable giving and that there might be an opportunity on the organizational side of the Veterans Initiative. I'd connected with a part-time advisory role they had mentioned. I told him I thought his name might come to mind if that materialized. He said he'd be grateful for any introduction. In the weeks that followed, Gary Moss's attorney contacted Patricia regarding the conduct inquiry. The process took several months and was not public in the way that court proceedings are, but what I was told afterward was that Gary's license was suspended for 6 months and he was placed under conditions of supervised practice for 2 years thereafter. He sent me a written apology I read once and filed away. I did not respond to it. There is nothing in the professional conduct rules that requires a man to accept an apology, and I decided I was not going to perform forgiveness I hadn't yet found in myself, simply because it was the gracious thing to do. My son and I had the honest conversation I had offered. It took him 3 weeks to ask for it. We sat at a restaurant near his office on a Wednesday afternoon, and he was more truthful than I had expected. He admitted it had started as a conversation between him and his wife about financial security, that his wife had brought Gary into it, that somewhere along the way, a legitimate concern had been channeled into something he knew was wrong, and had kept going with it anyway, because he told himself it was still somehow for my benefit. I listened without interrupting. I asked him one question at the end. At what point did you tell yourself it was for my benefit, and at what point did you know that wasn't true? He didn't have an answer for that. I told him that was the question worth sitting with. We are still in contact. Some things take longer to repair than others, and I am 67 years old and I have learned not to rush the process. I have also learned that love and trust are not the same thing, and that rebuilding one does not automatically rebuild the other. Margaret's ring sits in the small wooden box on my dresser, where it has always been. I have decided it belongs to no one else. I pick it up sometimes in the morning when the light comes through the bedroom window, at that particular angle that makes everything look clear and unhurried, and I hold it in my palm for a minute before I put it back. It still catches the light. Small diamonds around a single sapphire center. 39 years. I had lunch with Raymond and his family in December. His younger daughter is quieter than her sister, and very serious about birds. She had a field guide in her bag and spent the first 10 minutes at the table telling me about a yellow-rumped warbler she had seen outside her school window. I told her I had always found birds reliable in a way that people sometimes weren't. She thought about that very gravely for a moment and said she thought that was probably true. Raymond got the advisory introduction. He took the role in January. James Holbrook told me in February that Raymond had already overhauled their project tracking system and caught 2 budget errors in the intake process. I was not surprised. I wake up every morning in a house that is quieter than I would choose, in a city that moves faster than it did when I was building things in it, with accounts that are properly structured, an attorney I can actually trust, and a letter on the State Bar's record that says clearly what kind of man Gary Moss chose to be when he thought no one was watching. I have my health, more or less. I have a purpose, more or less. I have the particular peace that comes from having been tested and not having failed the test, which is not the same thing as being unscathed by it. There is a photograph on my refrigerator that James Holbrook's organization sent me, a family in front of a newly renovated house in Franklin, a veteran in his mid-30s with his arm around a woman holding a toddler, all 3 of them looking at the camera with the expression of people who have been given something they had stopped expecting. I put it up there the week it arrived. I see it every morning when I get my coffee. Margaret would have liked that photograph. She would have put it up even faster than I did. Some things end and other things begin, and the 2 are not as separate as you would think when you are standing in the middle of either one. A man my age knows that better than he did when he was younger, and knowing it is not always comfortable, but it is something. It is, most mornings, enough.